Right, okay, so welcome to the Highway Code, and today in the podcast we've got Kay Van Damme, who's on the line now all the way from sunny Belgium. Is it sunny, Kay?
It is very sunny here today, Bob. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So you're originally from Belgium, but I got to know you obviously through the University of Birmingham when you spent quite a bit of time there. We met obviously through Muay Thai, but you've got a lot more interesting stuff than just Muay Thai to talk about today. Am I right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back. Let's go back to the first time we met in Birmingham. What were you doing in Birmingham University at that time?
So at the time, I was hired as a postdoc in the School of Biosciences in the University of Birmingham. So It was my first time actually having a job of any kind in the UK, and that was my first introduction in the academic world in the UK as well. So I moved as soon as I had the offer. I actually moved straight to the UK, and then started my job as a postdoc for about 2.5 years, but I stayed in total 3 years because I actually wanted 6 months more of Thai boxing in the end.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So for those that aren't sort of moving in academic circles, what do you mean by a postdoc?
Oh, I'm sorry. A postdoc is after you acquired your PhD, you can do temporary jobs in science, which are called postdocs. They're normally 1 to 2 years of a job under a certain project where you can follow up on the time after the PhD and before you go into like a permanent position or you move to business or another way. So
right.
Postdocs are normally in other countries than where you did the PhD. So when you do your doctorate in science, it's to get some experience in other institutes. So you normally accumulate postdocs for different years.
Yeah.
And I had just done a very short one in China for a while, where I met somebody who said, I'm going to start a lab in Birmingham, and then I moved to Birmingham.
So you went, when did you do your PhD then, in Belgium?
In Belgium, I did my PhD I did it for quite a long time. So I finished my studies in 1996, my master's, 1998, and then I actually started my PhD soon after, but also teaching part-time at the university. So in Belgium, we had this position where you can be partly teaching as a assistant of the professor,
Right.
and at the same time you can do research. And therefore, I was 40% on the one job and 60 on the other. So I was taking the jobs partly of my professor who was retiring and doing my PhD. So it took me a long time. So I finished my PhD finally in 2010. That's
right, 2010. So quite a long time then. Yeah. What was your PhD in? I mean, because obviously, for people that don't know this, you tend to specialize when you do your PhD and pick a specific topic that you're going to research. What was yours?
I was fascinated by travel and by nature. So I did my PhD a bit where I could find the combination of both nature and travel. So I did my PhD in freshwater zooplankton,
Right.
like very little animals, crustaceans that live in freshwater. And I did my PhD in how they are classified and whether the groups that they are classified in actually make sense. So I was making drawings of them and studying them and looking into the ecology. And this came forth from my master's, where I had studied them in Brazil. I spent some time in Brazil looking at them, and I was so fascinated by them, plus by looking into waters around the world, that I wanted to continue in this field.
Right. So they're essentially like a kind of water flea, Was that the right thing to call these zooplankton, or are they even smaller than that?
Yeah, no, that's the word. Water flea is the word for these animals. So sometimes they're known in school as Daphnia because they're quite popular.
Ah, Daphnia, yeah.
Yeah. So they're one of these popular subjects because they're quite transparent, so you can see the heart beating and stuff, and you can watch them in the water. You can do little experiments with them, and you can even send them to space. We sent them to space.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because your claim to fame is you've had these Daphnia up on the ISS, up on the space station.
Yeah.
As an experiment.
Yeah. We were approached by, it's called ISET. It's a space training program that is set up by a millionaire who works together with NASA on, they write out competitions for schools who come up with ideas for things that can go to space.
Right.
One of the schools in Wales actually came up with this idea of why don't we send water fleas to space? And they got the award and they were granted the idea. And then this organization, ISET, it was looking for scientists to work with them and to turn the school idea into proper science and to work together with these kids to realize their dream, because what bigger dream is there for a kid than to send something to space and be part
absolutely.
Of space. So with one of the rockets of Elon Musk, actually I think it was one of the first SpaceX rockets, these animals went up straight from Edgbaston Pool into space, and then they went to the ISS and were looked at by one of the British astronauts at the time.
Right. Did you learn anything from it? It seems like a weird thing to do, to send these creatures up into space, these tiny little creatures up into space, and there must have been obviously another there's certainly, other than just a bunch of kids in Wales would like to get their project. I mean, what did you notice with them? Did they mutate and turn into giant space fleas and then like the Fantastic Four or something like that?
Actually quite a sad story, because I think eventually they were ejected out of the space station, so they're frozen and forever in space.
Oh, so they're in orbit then?
Yeah, they're in orbit, being part of the space junk. Maybe one of the few zooplankton space junks out there. But I mean, the idea was, the science behind it is quite interesting, because there are some interesting space programs involving these water fleas, and there's even a book about things in space where they have their own chapter. And
right.
It is for 2 or 3 different reasons. One is an experimental reason where you can actually look at the effects of zero gravity on bodies, and it's hard to experiment on humans, of course.
Well, yeah.
In space, so people always look for kind of experimental organisms, and these water fleas are useful experimental organisms to look at the stress that microgravity would have on them.
Of course, because they're transparent as well. You can see their internal organs.
Yeah, and you can look at the genetic effects of stress and stuff. So if you could retrieve them back from space, you can actually have a look at how it affected them to be in space. So that was one approach, but it was very costly to bring them back, apparently. So it was a one-way trip for the poor water fleas. And the other idea that they've been used in space for is that now we're talking about, space travel in maybe 100 years from now, but if people would go to Mars, for example, or further, they would have self-sustaining systems. They would need self-sustaining systems for food, because you can't keep feeding them algae for 100 days. I mean, they tested this on people, and it's quite boring food, like if you give them spirulina or something every day. So there is a system called self-sustaining ecosystems, which have been studied in space, where you make like a self-sustaining system which has algae, and then another level in the food chain like plankton, and maybe another level in the food chain like fish. Yeah. And in the ideal case, you could set this up with groups that have a resting stage. Like you could, in other words, you can grow them from resting stages. So you have the dry matter for it, and you put some water in it, and you have the algae, you have the animals and the fish, and there's groups of like this at every stage. And then
So
you have your own
you're
systems.
sort of creating a higher form of protein that you can live on.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
That's
And
the
this is, we're
idea.
talking about humans as well, obviously. Like you're saying, 100 years' time, if or when we go to Mars or whatever,
Yeah.
and we want to colonize because we've destroyed this planet.
Exactly, yeah. So that's one of the things that they're also being used for. So people are looking into, can they actually survive in a closed system? How difficult it is to set up these closed systems, and what are the challenges? So in this case, the challenge was size, light. We tried it in little boxes with the algae already in there, but Daphnia weren't doing so well. So
Okay.
so we learned something from it, and actually became part of a chapter in a space book on what we learned from it. So it's a very specific field of science. I find it fun, very very much fun to do. But it seems that there's lots of interest in it, and there's still other people working on these kind of things. So it was really a huge fun to work with. It was together with University College in London, and who are in charge of the science in general, and then from Birmingham, we supported the
And that's a Department of Biosciences.
yeah.
So are you a biologist or a bioscientist? What?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. I would consider myself a biologist. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is all fascinating stuff that we've never talked about really before, other than just flirted around it, because we tend to talk about other things like philosophy and martial arts and that. But I'm fascinated because I didn't know you'd been in Brazil prior to you being. I knew you'd been in China, so you've been to Brazil, so you're quite well travelled anyway. And I remember you talking to me about some work you've been doing in the Yemen whilst the war's been going on. I mean, that's got to be a pretty scary place to be doing research, isn't it, of some kind? Well, how did that happen, and why? Why would you go to a war zone?
Yeah. So when I finished my master's degree, coming back from Brazil, and I still had to choose my PhD topic, which I wanted to be with the same professor because he was very supportive of my master's. He just after my master's, he said that he was invited in an expedition to go to the Yemen and to one island that belongs to Yemen, which is actually the largest island of the Arabian world, which is called Socotra Island.
Okay.
Which is in the Western Indian Ocean, just off the Horn of Africa.
Yeah.
And he said, I've already been there, so why don't you go in my place to do this expedition, look for some freshwater stuff in there, because it's a big expedition. It has people looking at plants, reptiles, different groups, and they need somebody. And I've already been there, so you can go in my place. I was like, whoa, great.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
My professor was amazing in these things. I mean, he would always give me the chances to expand my world and visit places that I've never been before. And as a 22 or 23-year-old student, I was like, yeah. I said yes to anything. I was a yes man. Yes, anything, yes. So I said yes, and I went, and I completely fell in love with the place, both with Yemen as a country, and the people being very hospitable and nice towards me, and with the nature and the place of Socotra Island. I was completely touched. So when I came back, I fell completely in love. I was not allowed to make a PhD on this because the funding agency said, no, too dangerous if you can't go. It was already unstable at the time, so that actually never really changed much. So sneakily, I kept working on Socotra even while doing my PhD. So we produced a book on the place while I was doing my PhD. In 2006, there was this book on the natural history of Socotra.
Oh, right. Okay.
And yeah, that was because we were a big team on the island the first time. I was the youngest of the team, and I watched all these scientists really loving these plants and these reptiles and all of the other things they found. And I thought, why don't we put all of this stuff together, and why don't we edit a book about what is here about this place, because all the knowledge was scattered all over the place. So, and in fact, that was the first. This was in 1999. I went the first time, so it was the first time since in hundreds of years that people were actually had done some zoological surveys. Well, there had been a few, but not of this this amount of information was not gathered before. So it was
Yeah.
quite interesting. People are still describing species from that trip.
Oh, right. Okay.
So Yemen was to me always a very pleasant place to go, even during the most difficult times, because the people there remain surprisingly positive while being in the worst misery in the world. I mean, Yemen
Yeah.
has been struck by climate change issues like floods on the coast, now Corona on top of it, the war. I mean, these are horrible things. But when you're there in Socotra or in the mainland, then I know people are so friendly, and this I've always respected and admired this highly, and I've always felt more at ease being in Yemen than somewhere in a very modern society, and where this
Yeah.
where this link between people actually is a bit lost in general.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, I mean, you know, you go to places in the third world and you feel safer there than you do in the middle of Birmingham.
Well, I was exactly going to say that. When I would walk the streets of Broad Street in the night, going home from the lab, I would feel that it was less safe than actually walking in Yemen, where people have a community sense of, okay, this person is on his own. We have to make sure that he's safe, and they will also talk to you and say, "Are you alone? Are you okay? Maybe it's not safe here. Maybe you should come and drink tea with us." Oh, okay. So you tend to be more interactive, and not saying my Birmingham experience was a negative one, but in general, walking the streets of Birmingham at night gave me a different feeling than walking the streets of Sana'a or somewhere in Hadibu, which is the capital of Socotra, in the evening.
Yeah,
it's a different feeling.
I would agree with that, and I think anybody who's listening who's been to countries like that will tell you the same thing. And it's funny, the most impoverished people are the most generous.
Yeah, and you can feel it now in this Corona period, where the sense of community is something really important that people also expect. And I think I've expected a lot of let's say, people in our country here, of how they react to this, like when you go to a shop, and it's been positive throughout, but I've also seen things where people actually don't really seem to have any sense of community or responsibility of being able to either carry it on or receive it and then carry it on to someone else. Whereas, I mean, this is something that this sense of community is because we are not dependent as much as, or it seems that we're not dependent as much anymore of each other in survival, but they are, and of their environment. So
because they have less. And I think exactly what you said, that's happening in Belgium, happens here in the UK, where you've got a real extreme between some people who are really want to help you and take part, and they'll be careful about social distancing and all of that sort of thing. And then on the other hand, you've got groups of people who just don't give a shit, very selfish, and that's become more and more extreme now. And I think I mean, going back to just when I was a child, it sounds like I'm an old man talking about the good old days, but we used to live in sort of what people would call slums now. Where I lived in the 50s, it would be called slums. But as a child, you didn't say it like that because that's where you were from. And there was no running water or anything like that, just standpipes, and you had a heater water for a bath, and you only had a bath once a week, stuff like that. But everybody in that street looked after each other, and it sounds a little bit far-fetched, I think, to the modern adult, but certainly people of my generation can remember that there was still a lot of crap going on, but there was more, people would back each other up. You had more respect for each other as well, and that's gone to a certain extent. I mean, I'm lucky in the street I live, the neighbors are pretty good, people we tend to talk to each other and, I think look after each other, but there's still you know, in modern society, there's an element of screw you, Jack, I'm all right, you know, and it obviously happens in Belgium as well. It happens all over Europe and in the developed world, I guess.
Yeah, well, when the way I see it is when I see someone who has a community sense and who is responsible and talks about this, or we said, okay, I'm a bit worried about my grandmother, so I'm not going to take this. I'm not going to go to this party. Then they stand out.
Yeah,
it should be the norm, but it's not.
It should be the norm. Yeah.
Right.
You used the word there, community, a couple of times, right? And it's funny, isn't it? Because how did we meet? We met through a community, which is Thai boxing at the university, and I'm not laboring the point too much when I say it really is like a family, like a community, isn't it? I remember standing in front of you guys, and I've done it many times over the years I've been teaching at Birmingham. I've looked at this group, and we had I remember one session, there was you from Belgium, there was a guy from France, one from Italy, a couple from Italy, I think. There was 2 Iranians, an Iraqi, a couple of Americans, a Geordie, obviously that's me, and people from all over the country. And we were all just working together, everybody having a laugh, everybody drinking together, looking after each other, genuinely concerned for each other's welfare, and no ego. And I remember saying, wouldn't it be good if the United Nations was made up of people like this? How people can just work together, you know, black, white, yellow, green, pink, you know, it didn't matter. It made no difference.
Yeah, I was looking for that in Birmingham when I arrived. I always, wherever I go, I look for that kind of environment where the ego is not the most important, and where people have, I don't know, work for a common cause in some way. And in martial arts, you can well, let's not in all schools in martial arts, but in some schools in martial arts, you can feel that community sense. And I had that when I was really looking for that in Birmingham, because arriving from, even though I'm just across the channel, it's a 40-kilometer stretch.
Yeah,
it's a completely different world between Belgium and the UK. So. And especially me, I'm coming from the countryside, moving to a city like Birmingham. Birmingham is a huge, second biggest city in the UK. It's a big, it's a big place. Living in the middle of the city. I mean, I live just off Broad Street, so that was a big move actually. It was a big change, and the academic world, at least the lab I was in, didn't have that community spirit, that kind of cohesion. People were more interested in their own career, which I can respect. If that's their way and they're open about it, it's okay. People have that, it's all right. But it was only when I came across the Thai boxing group in Birmingham, which is one of the societies, right? It's one of
that's right. Yeah.
That I was actually content with being in the UK, and then I actually started loving being in the UK, and I had another perspective on being in Birmingham. I thought, okay, Birmingham, maybe it's not the nicest place I've ever been, but you know, it's like one of these pugs. They can be really ugly dogs, but you start to love them in a way. It's like, you're so ugly, but I love you. So I had that feeling with Birmingham, and actually went back several times because I thought, okay, and the Thai boxing got connected to it for me, and I had that feeling in the gym. Well, or wherever we
trained,
wherever we trained, of no one being, I don't know, I've never seen anybody being aggressive towards another. I've never seen anyone being intolerant towards another. Not that I've seen during my times of training, at least, and I've never seen. And when there was an ego there that popped up, you would very quickly react to it.
Oh yes,
never stay for a long time.
We didn't like egos in the gym. No.
So everything was really focused on the training, and so everybody had this common goal of improving their physical stance, but also their mental way of coping with endurance and stuff. So I really enjoyed that.
Well, I mean, I know for a fact you were one of, because you always get a small group. I mean, there were big classes, weren't there, at the university? You know, the club's been going for 35 years. There's a big society. And it started with really small roots, but my idea was always to make it a family rather than a monetized club, you know, where you had to do gradings, you had to pay the fees on time, you had to wear the uniform, blah, blah, blah. It was more about the training, and it was about personalities and building a group that was cohesive and shared the same values, and were open to new ideas as well. So you were one of the fairly small group, about 10 to 12. There's a hard core of about, well, maybe more, maybe 12 to 15 people at the time, who would come back regularly. And I always noticed that you would come to the gym, you'd come and train at the uni. If there were seminars, you'd come to them. Anything, it was almost like you were some sort of sponge soaking it all up. And would you say, my question really is that what kept you in Birmingham?
Yeah. It motivated me to actually be in Birmingham, to stay in Birmingham for a while, and it motivated me in my work as well, because I had something to look forward to. I think at that time, we almost trained almost nearly every day. There was training on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and then the fight was on Friday, and then sometimes on the Saturday or the Sunday as well. And as soon as West Heath was on, so I was working from morning to evening, thinking, okay, 5 o'clock I can stop. 6 o'clock I can go to I can grab a bite. I would meet up with our Iranian friend Sharia, and then grab a bite or meet up, and then go to so that everything was a bit digested before we started training. It was all it was easier to plan my day when I had the train in my and actually, to be very honest, Bob, before I did Thai boxing, I had actually never really done much sports.
Okay.
I never felt like I needed to, because I was always like, okay, I can do whatever I want. So I can walk a lot, I can do stuff, but I never really committed to sports. I also didn't think I would actually like it that much. So I would go for cycling or for runs, but not with like an idea of improving myself in a sport. So it was really a new kind of concept.
So you weren't one of the youngest in the class, were you? How old were you when you started Thai then?
I think when I started Thai boxing, well, the first time I saw it was in China. That was the first time I saw it. And I really liked it there. I was like, okay, this is something interesting. I thought it would be something aggressive, crazy, but it wasn't. It was always, even in China, had a very good, because you mentioned, before we started talking, you mentioned Kung Fu just briefly, right?
Yeah, Kung Fu, yeah.
And there were 2 guys in there who actually had lived in one of these Kung Fu temples.
Oh, okay.
And they were, they were like mentally really into martial arts completely, and they didn't speak a word of English, but the way they trained, I was like, the way they kicked the bag, but also the way they were teaching me stuff without being able to communicate. Just like, I remember this guy, and I didn't know what he was saying, like, if you want to, he was showing the hook, but starting from turning his foot to the knee, to the hip, to the body.
Yeah.
I was looking at it, I had no idea what he's trying to say. And then I realized, okay, the power comes from the hip, not from the shoulder or the arm. So that was the first time, but very briefly. And then when I came there, I saw it really was very interesting. So sorry, what was the question again, Bob?
So it was like you got into Muay Thai quite late, because obviously Muay Thai is always seen as a young man, young woman sport. So obviously at the university, it's made up of freshers, usually young students, 19 years old, first time they've come from home, living in a big wide world, and they start Muay Thai. Some of them go on to fight, most of them don't. But nevertheless, it's a very young sport. And you were
36 when I started.
36, which is quite old to start Muay Thai.
Yeah.
Because it is a young man's sport. But, and my main point is that you were older than the rest, okay? Had never done any sport before. But I remember you after, I think I'm right in saying, after about 3 months, you had your first interclub, which shocked and surprised me. And worried me, because you were older and you'd only just started. But I was confident that you would handle yourself well because of your mental attitude. Not so much your technique at first, but it was more about your mental aptitude, this desire to do it. And I knew I had to feed that desire, because otherwise, you would have gone off your head. And you did very well in your first fight. You don't think you did, but you did. And that surprised me, because a lot of young guys, 19, 20, who were super fit, had done some sort of contact sports or martial arts before would not do. Oh, I'm not ready for the interclub. And you were like, can I have an interclub, Bob? I need an interclub.
Yeah.
And then, of course, every time there was an interclub, you'd be the first up.
I remember why I did it. I thought there is no way I can learn this if I don't put it to practice.
Absolutely, which is what I always say. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, okay, we're punching these bags. That's okay. We're doing some sparring. That's all right. But if I'm not in a completely stressed situation, then I won't know how good my technique is. So I won't know if I don't do it under pressure and have to put it all together when somebody does it with speed. So I thought the only way to learn it is to do it. And also, well, you don't, in training, you'll never get hurt in training unless you do something really stupid, which is mostly then your own fault or your partner, but mostly you're there to make sure that doesn't happen. I mean, the coach is there, and you always look out for that. I mean, if something happened, it was completely unexpected or something but actually when you're in the ring, there's a bit more risk to actually get a punch in the face, get punched on your nose. So you have to be switched on. So I wanted that feeling to see what it was, and I was very happy I did it, because there's nothing that wakes you up more than getting a punch in the face and saying, okay, now you have to really look at your technique because something's wrong. So it's an amazing way to learn very fast. And so
it's a pragmatic way of looking at things, isn't it? And of course, you're a scientist, so you need evidence.
Yeah, I needed evidence in a statistical ways by repetition. So I was like, okay, this. And then there was always feedback between the rounds with you saying, what am I doing wrong? What could I do better? And you would always give just not too much information, but a very specific thing and say, this and this, keep your guard up, or do this. And that really helped. It was small things. And then you improve. And then I really loved it. And you can only improve, I think, in jumps with these.
And of course, some of the people you were sparring with were people who had quite a few fights under their belt and were highly skilled. And that still didn't put you off.
No. So I had two fights in the first interclub, and the first fight was with Dean, who is
Dean Reed, who almost was a British title holder, I believe, at one point. Yeah, and he's strong.
And I remember him because the week before, I mean, this won't mean to anyone who's watching this beyond the club. I'm sorry but the week before we had practiced knees. And Josh Twining, who has a club now in Ireland,
that's right. He's a chief instructor in Belfast, isn't he? I want to get him on as well, obviously, because he's a scientist as well, isn't he?
He's a great biologist.
The biologist as well, yeah.
Bowls now are martyrs or some.
That's right.
Really cool mammals now. So he has these very sharp knees when his knees still worked really well.
When they worked.
When we were practicing knees, and so I had. And I felt my ribs really hurt on that side from a knee. I mean, his knees would go between the intercostals. I don't know.
Yeah, they're very pointy.
Josh is very good, and I was happy to train always with him in the beginning. So I remember coming into the first fight in the interclub, and I said to Dean, just before the fight, you always let the fighters talk to each other.
That's right. Always
shake hands and talk, which I think was really cool. And I remember telling him, I said, could you go easy on this side, please? Because I think I might have, I don't know, bruised a rib. I mean, it was my first fight. I was like, I don't want a cracked rib. And the first thing he did when the fight started was he kicked me straight in the rib. And I said during the fight, why? And he said, you shouldn't have told me. It's first lesson of fighting. Shouldn't tell your weaknesses to your opponent. We'll remember that. That's a
bit naughty of Dean.
That was a bit naughty, but it was.
But it didn't put you off.
It didn't put me off. And towards the second round, you said he doesn't expect you to punch him and kick him, so kick him and punch him, and that's when I started to come back, and that was the case. And I had that was a great experience. I think we had an applause at the end of the round from the people that he trained with, like, you're still standing. That was really good because he didn't hold back, and I was happy about that.
Yeah, and I always made sure that, because it was an interclub, if people were going heavy, were you happy with that? And I remember coming to your corner and you saying, no, I'm fine, I'm loving it. And you had this big grin on your face, and And I thought, yep, he's made for Thai boxing. A weaker man would have walked out at that point, because I always give people the opportunity to leave the fight gracefully, because it's an interclub. It's not about showing people up. It's about learning to be confident under stress and under pressure. So obviously, your time in Birmingham came to an end and you had to leave. Although you have in the past come back for validations and things like that, which always surprises people, because they go, he's come all, people can't be bothered to come from just down the road in Birmingham, but you travel all the way in from Belgium. But like you made the point, it's not actually that far, Bob. Belgium's not
closer than Glasgow, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's like if I drive to Aberdeen, that's 8 hours. I could have been to Belgium 3 times probably.
Exactly.
So you're not that far away. But you've, we'll probably come back to Thai boxing on another episode, to be honest. But unless there's something you want to add. But I want to move it sort of fast forward, because you moved back to Belgium, obviously. And then you got involved in Western Sword, and I believe it all started because I bought a Victorian sword, and then you said, "Oh, my dad's got loads," and then proceeded to pull out all these amazing Victorian and Georgian and a variety of weapons, both English and French, I believe, or Dutch or whatever, because your dad collected them. And then that got you into what we commonly known as HEMA, historical European martial arts. So and that's been going on, what, 6 months, 7 months, maybe a bit more, I don't know. I've been doing it about a year. I've been into sword now, practical sword, about a year and a half or something. Although I've done edge weapons for a long time. What happened there? Was that my fault?
Yes, I think partly it was. I mean, when I came back from Birmingham, I did miss the Muay Thai training, because it also gave me some kind of, it was a really good, gave a schedule also, like it was people need structure, right? It gave me a structure in martial arts, gave me a great structure as well. So for a while I went into climbing, which I really liked as well.
Okay, yeah, of course.
Bouldering, not with ropes, but bouldering, so the free climbing, and we're not that far here from Fontainebleau, which is
Fontainebleau, very famous.
Yeah. So
well, a lot of people don't know this, but I was really into my climbing in the 80s. Me and my sons used to go climbing a lot in the Peak District on sandstone, with and without ropes. I had a climbing wall in my old gym, as it happens, an actual climbing wall that me and another chap, Alan, who's sadly no longer with us, built in the gym, and me and Alan used to practice routes on that. So you got into climbing. It's a great sport.
Yeah, bouldering. So I was like, why didn't I discover this when I was 16? Where did I do that? But it wasn't that popular. Now it became like a mainstream popular thing.
It's huge now. Yeah.
Part of the Olympics and stuff. So, I mean, the facilities now are quite new. So there's this quite relatively new thing in Ghent where I was, and then I started to do this like 3 or 4 times a week, several hours each time. I mean, training would be up to 5 hours each time sometimes. So met some great people there who were really into bouldering as well. Some people were actually training for national competition and stuff. So really nice stuff. But then when Corona happened, there's no place to go. So and we were already talking about swords a little bit.
Oh yeah, we had been, hadn't we? Yeah.
And then we just started to talk about, there are all these swords in the house here, and I thought, there's all these swords, I don't even know how to use them. I wouldn't know what to do with them. Like it's here, and they're quite heavy. And then when you started talking about it, I thought this is quite interesting. And then we started to look into some sessions. You showed some system, which is this, and the Catalan Society system.
Yeah.
And as soon as I started to do it with a training sword, I thought, this feels interesting. This is a completely different way of moving again.
Oh yeah, totally, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's one of these things. I don't know if people watching this who haven't done any martial arts in any way, but martial arts is something where you feel improvement quite rapidly, and then you stagnate again, and then you improve again. And that's a great feeling because it's a physical thing. You can feel your body change with the movement. So you do it for a few weeks and you suddenly think, this isn't so heavy anymore. I can move this now. And then the movements become a bit more fluid. And So I enjoy that a lot. So the sword thing is the next thing. We haven't stopped with Muay Thai.
No,
And I
no.
will
I mean,
stop climbing as well. But
although
it's
you
completely
are
different.
training online Muay Thai. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not perfect. It's not the best way to do Muay Thai, but it is what it is. But
But
yeah,
the sword, and it's also the historical dimension of it. So you start reading about it. I mean, Muay Thai doesn't have these enormous libraries of things that have been written about it
no.
historically, but the European martial arts has this huge library of, and you start reading about people actually living in those conditions.
Oh yeah,
And then I read it and I look at the people in Yemen where I meet them. And I think they're living in those conditions right now, survival from one to the other day. So it kind of helps me connect also to people there. And then you read about them and they have to survive every day. So I have the different concept of what actually survival means and taking risks means. So I got very fascinated by it and still
it's the
read it.
bigger picture, isn't it? Because, like, quite rightly, what you've said, Kay, is that the treatises, these historical documents outline the lives of people who actually were in combat every day, and we don't necessarily mean war. We mean people carried weapons and had confrontations with them. We attended a McBain online conference, didn't we, a few weeks ago now,
Yeah.
and Daniel McBain is a famous, just for those that need to look at it, I'll put a thing in the description box on YouTube on the podcast if people want to follow these sources up. But McBain was a real true to life martial artist in the truest sense of the word, in terms of his psychological attributes as well as his physical skill set, and fought combat regularly. And you are sort of trying to research, because although he was Daniel McBain is originally from the United Kingdom, he spent a lot of time fighting in Flanders. And Flanders, for those that don't know, is sort of the area where Kay is, sort of what's known as Belgium and Ghent. You're in Ghent, aren't you, that area?
Yeah, near to Ghent.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So Ghent was one of the main sort of staging points for one of his fencing schools, McBain's fencing schools. And tell us a bit more about that.
So this Scotland Highland born fighter, actually he was stationed in Belgium, in Flanders, several times during the Spanish succession wars, because the Allied forces and United Kingdom was one of them, and they were asked to liberate Ghent and Flanders from the French.
Yeah.
So they came here, and then when they came to Ghent, which is a town I absolutely love, it's amazing. They were stationed here for winters in their winter quarters, and they had to make some living sometimes and some money. So McBain, when he stayed here, he set up a fencing school and a gambling school as well, and other side activities,
and some other
side activities, yeah, which he apparently always did. And when I read this in his let's say memoirs, but also treatise about sword fighting, which is very interesting, he was describing it. He really liked it here, so I thought there must be some record about it here. So I started to dig into it, contact some historians, trying to find out where he lived, or at least where the soldiers were stationed. Found out that Marlborough, who was the Duke of Marlborough, his real name was Churchill, right? Because he was an ancestor of Churchill, Winston Churchill. He actually let some soldier houses be built here by city money, actually. So when they came, they said, "Oh, you have to build them, and we will put the soldiers in there." But those were one of the first workers' houses in Ghent, apparently. So
okay.
And they were only dug up very recently, and so I found the documents about the digs and what they found inside. In one of those houses, they found a skeleton of somebody was hidden on the floor.
Yeah.
So some things must have gone down in those houses. So, and it's a very hard time, because one of those winters, I think 1708, the winter of 1708 or 1707, was the hardest winter in Europe in history.
Right.
So these guys, they must have been in really difficult conditions. And then McBain writes, "I had a great time." So what did he do? So I'm fascinated about this, trying to find out. And one of his descriptions in Ghent was, I was walking one day to the castle, and I saw a woman and a man fighting at the castle. I tried to find out where the castle was, and he interfered, asking the man not to hit the woman. And when he told this to the man, the woman actually pulled his hair from the back, and the man bit his finger. So he said I was being pulled back by the woman and the man, and it was hilarious to everybody who was watching. And I learned that day never to meddle between a married man and a woman, which was funny because he was doing that for his entire life, probably. So,
Oh yeah, he did that all of his life. Yeah.
So these little anecdotes I tried to find out. I think it would make a great story someday for people.
Well, I believe, I think, I'm not 100% sure. I believe Ben Miller, who featured quite heavily in the McBain online thing that we took part in. I think he's a film director, and I believe he said he's putting the life story of McBain together. But of course, there are missing pieces to the puzzle, which obviously was his time around Ghent in Flanders. So you might be doing the film a service, you know. You're sort of getting involved. It's the sort of thing I would do if I found out that McBain had been in Birmingham, for example, you know. So from space fleas to sword fighting, you know.
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't it be great to find out that McBain actually had an influence on the fencing culture in Ghent, because Ghent has the oldest fencing school in the world, apparently. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But it was closed for a while during that time Sorry, they wrote to people from the fencing school, and they were fascinated by it as well. Like, yeah, what happened there? Because interesting. So I wonder how these interactions went between these British and Scottish soldiers that came to the Netherlands and to Flanders, and how they influenced the local culture, and vice versa. How these interactions were. So I don't know. It's kind of it's a sideline, but it's quite interesting. So.
Oh yeah, it's a fascinating subject. So. What does the future hold?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I'm still involved in all of these things, in both the Yemen and Socotra, where we're doing still conservation activities. I'm actually currently a chairperson of a UK charity, which is called Friends of Socotra, that tries to create awareness of the beauty of nature there, and the culture, the unique culture.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm still involved there in trying to help in helping to protect nature there. That's the biggest challenge against, you know, all the challenges there are, like
war,
poverty,
and climate change,
which I think
corona,
on top of that. So wherever we can help, and we're being asked to do so. Not that we're trying to impose anything from our Western limited view of thinking how things should work somewhere else.
Oh.
But that's something I still would like to remain involved in. And then there's my water fleas, which I really like. So I was writing about them today, so I keep involved with them. So in the future, I would really like to keep working with those topics and expand further. And it was, as you know, it was always a bit of a silent dream to also start like a little martial arts school here, even
right.
Very small level. And if we can introduce some little bit of sword, that would be really, really cool, because people like it. Especially, I don't know why, but it also appeals to older people for some reason. Because
it does, it's strange. I think there's going to be, I think it's going to turn into a huge thing. I think it's going to be the next martial art, to be honest.
Yeah.
Which in a way is sad, because I've seen how these things are modernized and monetized beyond belief. And at the moment, from what I've seen of particularly the Catalan society, it's not monetized at all. You know, everybody's doing it because they love training, they love the history, they love everything about it, and it's been driven by passion rather than by the need for, you know, money. And people seem to get by in the smallest of places, you know, the smallest of fencing schools. And the great thing about sword is you turn up with your equipment, your swords, and you train. You don't need a boxing ring. You know, you don't need bags or any kind. You just need another person to hit. And those days of well, I mean, hopefully we'll be getting back over here. We're supposed to be going back in the gyms on the 27th, but I'm not so sure that's still safe yet. I'm erring on the side of caution. I don't know what's happening in Belgium now.
Well, gyms are open by appointment, so you have to.
You have to book in. Okay.
You have to book in so they can control the number of people. But actually, so since the last 3 days, our numbers are going up again. So the relaxation, I mean, you can see it has some effect on the numbers again.
Of course it does.
They're not as high as they are in the US, for example, where it's like, I don't know how many, but you can see there is some effect, and the biggest group now in Belgium, which is getting affected, or at least getting the disease, is between 20 and 29-year-olds.
Yeah, I saw those statistics actually. Yeah.
So that just shows it's the most interactive group now, and we don't really know. I mean, I'm a scientist, but I'm not a virologist. But I've learned in science how to read a paper. So I've been reading these papers, and science doesn't really know the complete effects of these things on the body, even for young people in the long term.
No, that's right.
I mean, there's even some relationships apparently between diabetes and having had COVID-19. So who knows what the effect?
Oh yeah, I remember there was a scientist talking about it right at the beginning, and he said we don't know the long-term effects of this. He was a respiratory guy, and he said we've got some evidence, and this was in the early days, to suggest that you could end up in your 60s and 70s with asthma-like symptoms. So things like the various comorbidities of COPD, you know, which is a pulmonary disease of the upper respiratory system, I believe, which affects your heart and your breathing, and it will kill you. It kills you. That COPD will kill you. And also there's possibly links that the damage that's been done to the upper respiratory tract, because that's the different thing about COVID, it attacks the upper respiratory tract, that you could end up with asbestosis-like symptoms, the symptoms of asbestosis, which is death essentially. And because the scar tissue that builds up. So you may have had COVID and survived it, but who knows what's going to happen when you're in your 60s and 70s. So it's quite interesting that this, and I remember seeing the statistic about that age group, and it's pretty obvious where it's come from. I mean, not from a scientific point of view, just common sense point of view. You slacken down on the laws on social distancing, and guess the first group that all come together was that age group. They open the pubs and restaurants in England. Who are the people who are going to go out there? The young people. And of course, there's the spike. And they're going to do the same with the gyms. And I'm not sure it's the right time to open it. And I've always been skeptical. But of course, you know, I'd rather listen to my Facebook friends than a virologist who's had 30 years experience of working with these things. And I was talking to a guy who's deals with upper respiratory tract problems. Do I listen to what he says, or do I listen to Joe Bloggs, who's got a gym in the middle of bloody Lancashire somewhere or whatever? You know, I'm not picking on anybody specifically, but anywhere. And you see them on Facebook, and you just shake your head and you go, "This is why society's getting dumber." You know.
Well, it's also, I guess, a natural thing. I mean, an instinctive thing of people to think that when we're younger, our body has an unlimited, you know, it's something you can use without having any effect. And then, okay, I'm just in my 40s, but I can already know that things I've done before that I've overstrained, I will definitely feel, and I feel it already sometimes. So
I can guarantee that attitude, because I had a horrendous attitude towards injuries, and between the ages of 20 and 40, I was like indestructible. And in fact, up into my 50s, I was running down Ben Nevis when I was 55, which finished me off essentially. And when I look back on what I was doing, I would never have changed it, I'll be honest. You know, I've ended up with multiple problems with hip, spine, and knees, as you know, to the point where now at 63, I can't kick, walk, or properly. You know, it's but of course, when you're that age, you don't give a shit.
Yeah, and you don't give a shit about getting diseases sometimes too. But actually, these things, I think they do accumulate, and then I know of several people of my age who developed asthma from a normal influenza.
Oh yeah.
From having a normal influenza, that there are always really attacks on your body. So taking care of the body is really something is a long-term sustainable investment.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
your best investment you have. So,
yeah.
I mean, it is combinable, I think, with lots of extreme things. I mean, didn't do extreme sports when I was younger, but I did do like extreme hiking, and then all of these things that. But I think I pace myself a bit more now. I still do, like, you see me in the sessions. I still do all the
Oh,
stuff.
you still do it, but you do it
I
at
need
a,
to
yeah.
pace myself a little bit more,
And you have to.
and then okay. Sorry for the guys who are watching this, who are part of the sessions, but I feel a little bit have a bit of a tiny good feeling when I see these then the young guys really being exhausted halfway the session, having gone too hard. I'm still doing the push-ups and the sit-ups. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, just pace yourself. If you do this in the ring, you'll be finished by the third round.
Okay. What I always say, this is not a sprint; it's a marathon. Take your time, build up slowly towards the end, just like you do in a fight. And in Thailand, they train, 6 hours a day, 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, sometimes a bit more, with 1 day off usually. And you watch the Thais training, and it's the laziest form of training you could ever watch. Although it's hard, because
but they just keep doing it, so they build
it's
up
a marathon, not a sprint. And I think if you take that attitude on life, that life's a marathon, not a sprint, you'll do a lot better.
That's a good.
I think that's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
So if you had anything to say to people of your age moving into Muay Thai, or a philosophy on life in general, what would it be? If I put you on the spot there.
Oof, that's putting me on the spot. Yeah,
it's a big one. They put me on the spot the other week on the live stream. They said if I could come up with any thought about life, the universe, and everything, could I sum it up in one phrase? And I stopped for a second. I thought, I know nothing. That is
that's a nice one.
I know nothing.
Well, I had to adjust my thinking a little bit according to Corona, because there's limitations to what we can do. But if it's in a philosophical sense, I would say life's a travel. Enjoy the trip.
Yeah. Okay. So enjoy the journey.
Enjoy the journey. I mean, I'm basically a travel addict. I can't travel now because of Corona, and then you realize everything's a travel. Being home is a travel. Your morning to the evening is a travel.
Yeah.
So that would be my advice would be to younger people: travel as much as you can when you can, if that's a possibility, in the least ecological damaging way possible. But and do as much as you can. And then to people my age who want to do martial arts, just do it. It's great. I mean, your strength doesn't really go down with age. That's what I feel. It's just the way you approach injuries and things, that you may be a bit more careful. But there's nothing you can't do that these guys do, and you see it in the ring. So I think it's great. Just within your limitations, just do what you want and make it a great travel. That's my
enjoy the journey, recognize your limitations.
Yeah, that's
and the journey doesn't necessarily have to just be about traveling to actual places. You mean that metaphorically as well?
I meant that as metaphorically as possible. As in there's a book about that, The Art of Travel by Alain de Botton, about the.
Oh yeah, Alain de Botton. Yeah.
And it's about what travel means and what it is and what the journey means and what. It's a really interesting book. I can advise that to people who love travel and
I'll put the links to that in the description again. He's an interesting philosopher, he is. Because that's what he is. He's a philosopher as well as a traveler.
Yeah, I studied photography for a while as well, and I made that my final work.
What was that?
When I did art photography for 4 years.
Oh, okay.
During my biology time, and then I made that my final dissertation.
Maybe that's something we can talk about in the next one.
Good one.
Well, okay. So just to finish off, sorry to cut you short, but we can come back. We'll do part 2. That'll be fascinating. It's been interesting to talk to you, Kev. I've known you a long time, but whenever I do these podcasts, I always find out more stuff about people that I want to explore. But we're limited by the time, really. But we can always do part 2, part 3, part 4. Who knows? It's a journey. Recognize your limitations and enjoy the journey. And on that note, I just want to thank you very much, Kay. And I look forward to speaking to you soon, mate. All right.
Thanks, Bob, and thank you a lot for this time.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
My pleasure. Cheers.
Thank
Right.
you.